Oh, all right, I think we are live. So, welcome to our little post-election live stream. This is a tradition at the Nevada Independent where we digest and analyze what happened on election day and what comes next. But first, a few introductions. Sean Galanka is a politics and data reporter for the Nevada Independent, where he's helped cover some of the twists and turns of the primary caucus chaos and the race for the U.S. Senate. How are you, Sean?
I am doing well. I was not at any caucus sites last night, Jacob, so probably doing better than most.
It's true. It's true. The wonders it'll do for your mental health. Tabitha Mueller, she was at caucus sites last night, and she wears many hats at the Indy, among them politics, state government, and healthcare, with a extra smidge of being on the ground, like I said. So, Tabitha, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It was a late night last night, so
Oh
hopefully I
yeah,
don't stumble over my words today.
and we will dig into that. Eric Nugaboren, you are also on the ground this week. You are also a reporter of many hats. You help us cover politics and elections and data stuff. So thanks for being here, Eric.
Thanks for having me, Jacob.
All right. And the man who needs no introduction, John Ralston, is the CEO, founder, and editor of the Nevada Independent, a man of many opinions. How are you, John?
I am here to just have a scratchy and screechy voice to contrast with your beautiful voice, Jacob. It's the only reason I was invited. But seriously, it's great to see all of you. And I hope if anyone who's watching or listening doesn't get their questions answered, they can come to Craft in Reno tonight at 5:30. Brian Dugan from KNR and I will be there. And it's another Ask Us Anything event. We're in a partnership now, as you all know, with KUNR, and this is the kickoff event. So Craft at 5:30 in Reno.
Yes, if you cannot get enough live Nevada Independent content, we are here to give it to you. Okay, so all that out of the way, I'm your host, Jacob Solis. I guess I should introduce myself. I also cover politics and elections, and as you may have guessed, I have been keeping tabs on the race for president. And so, just to let everyone know, if you're in the audience right now, if you have questions for us, put those questions in the chat or send them to us on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, and we'll do our best to answer. But for now, I just want to kick things off with you, John, because I think a lot of time and energy was spent this week talking about how much of a mess this was going to be with the primary, with the caucus, just this whole week. So, how much did this week actually live up to those predictions? Where do you say we actually fell?
I think we fell somewhere in the spectrum between being totally dismissed and totally mocked. And none of that was good for us, I don't think. And Jacob, the confusion was real. I mean, people were really confused. And I'm not just talking about national media reporters or anchors on CNN or MSNBC. I'm talking about people here, people who went to the caucus, and then some of the folks here can tell you firsthand stories about that. But people here did not understand this process, the genesis of this process, why there had to be two Republican elections. And, some people in the state worked very, very hard for us to be taken seriously, which has been a struggle because Iowa and New Hampshire have traditionally been part of the early state matrix. And we've only been there for 15, 16 years now. And so this really hurt our already limited credibility, I think, in the minds of people outside of Nevada who watch this stuff.
Well, let's get into some of the confusion because I think we'll start with you, Tabitha, but Eric, too, you can jump in on this. I mean, when you were talking to voters, I think let's start with the primary, right? Because this was, I think, for Republicans especially, one of the genesis of maybe the confusion. Tabitha, what did voters say to you when they went to the polls and didn't see Donald Trump's name?
I think we had some voters who were definitely confused, right? They were like, well, isn't there a primary? Some voters didn't know that there was a caucus that was actually happening on Thursday. And actually, Janelle, one of our reporters down in Las Vegas, she was at a caucus site where the person showed up to vote, saw Donald Trump wasn't on the ballot, and just walked away and said, well, I guess I'll caucus, but I'm not going to vote at all. Other folks, I think, said this process was confusing and very frustrating, and they didn't. One person used the word, used the phrase, none of these candidates seemed worthwhile to him. So he marked none of these candidates on the ballot and then was kind of like, it's confusing and frustrating, but I guess I don't have a choice, right? And across the board, I think even at the caucus site on Thursday, we had people who were there who were like, yep, I am here because this is what the party has said it is. This is how the party is working. Now, other folks did really like the idea of the caucus because they were fans of the voter ID requirements that the caucus implemented. But I think that was more about a process thing versus just coming into caucus for the sake of caucusing. And that had less to do with the concurrent election processes.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I guess, Eric, looking at what was happening in Las Vegas, did you get the sense from caucus goers that when they were showing up, that they were like mad about the primary caucus thing, or like, were they confused? I guess, like, what for the caucus goer who actually showed up on Thursday, what was going through their mind?
Yeah, I would say it was kind of a mixed bag. There were one woman I spoke with who was a caucus goer said that she threw out her primary ballot when she saw that Donald Trump wasn't on it. Another person said they preferred the primary and voted for none of these candidates as a show of defiance against Nikki Haley. So I think it was a mixed bag. I mean, similar to what Tabitha saw up north, primary voters who voted for none of the above were still really confused. They didn't really. I talked to a couple people who voted for none of these candidates, and they didn't know why Trump wasn't on the ballot. They didn't know why there were two elections. So I think even for people that participated in either one of the contests, the confusion was very real.
Well, we'll get to the two elections thing in a second, but Sean, I want to come to you because you have been our a turnout wizard. You have been crunching the numbers, and I guess just to start, if we were to compare this election cycle to past election cycles, understanding that we've had a caucus forever, now we finally switched to the primary and a caucus, I guess. Where does this year fall historically?
Well, I love the new nickname, Jacob. Thank you. The
You're
turnout
welcome.
wizard is great. But I think, looking at turnout across the primaries and the caucus, I think this was a fairly robust year for turnout. I think comparisons to the past are hard in this election year because of how many changes there have been. Obviously, if we're just sticking to the caucus, which has, I think, the most direct comparison to years past, even if, as John says, it wasn't really a caucus. You could vote and leave. You didn't have to stay and be in meetings to kind of make your argument for why you're backing a candidate. But turnout in the Republican caucus this year was about 60,000, which, despite what Trump said, was not a record-setting caucus. The record was actually in the 2016 caucus, which he was in. So, maybe he should have remembered that, but we have some presidents with memory issues, it seems. And the 2016 caucus record was 75,000. So it was a bit behind that. And then, just looking at the primaries, turnout in the Republican primary was about 80,000. In the Democratic primary, it was about 134,000 at last count. And so both of those were record amounts, in terms of compared to past caucuses. But, like I said, the comparisons are hard because those primaries had mail voting, they had early voting. There were more than 1.1 million mail ballots sent out for the primaries, and a lot of those did not get used, but, enough of them were used to help drive this record turnout. And so, like I said, Jacob, I think the comparisons were hard, but certainly a robust year for turnout, considering, I think, the lack of competition in these races.
Yeah, I guess just for, like, generally speaking, caucuses have lower turnout than primaries because it's just harder to caucus, like, physically than it is to vote in a primary. That being said, we've had, like, lower turnout caucuses, so it wasn't like the bottom of the barrel, even considering, like John said, right, this being sort of the somewhere between meaningless or a joke or what have you. So actually, let's get to you, John, because something I want to ask about is the sort of consequence of what the Nevada GOP did, sort of assuming that everyone is up to speed on how we got here. I'm curious on your read on whether or not the state GOP sort of looks bad in the eyes of the national GOP or the Trump campaign, that they've sort of lost an amount of favor that they might have had before all of this mess.
Well, I mean, I think that the Nevada Republican Party, Jacob, has been seen by the national folks as a necessary evil, something that they have to deal with, led by a guy in Michael McDonald, who he's an open Trump supporter. He tried to claim neutrality early in this thing, and then essentially came out and urged people to caucus for Trump. And so listen, there are other state parties with problems, but to think that a guy like Michael McDonald, who has presided over this absolutely disastrous run for the Republicans in this state with maybe one glitch since 2008, and I think he got in 2012, but I may be wrong about that. But if you're a CEO like that, I'm not talking about now that I'm an expert in CEOs, you're gonna probably have your board fire you. But that's not what happens here. You have this central committee, which is just a few hundred people, that if you can keep them in your thrall, they will keep voting for you. And so, listen, McDonald is not liked by a lot of people in the so-called establishment Republican Party. That's been true for a long, long time. And there are other, I mean, he plays the politics of subtraction, and that's not going to change. But if Trump were to win the election, I assure you he's going to continue to be there for a while.
Oh, yeah. All right. So now we're starting to get some listener questions. So we're going to bounce to those. The first one we got is, and I quote here, I know we aren't supposed to read too much into what the numbers say about November, but I'm curious if you all were surprised with how close the Dem primary turnout was to the GOP caucus primary combined. So back to the turnout wizard, Sean, I guess, what do we make of the fact that if the two GOP contests were relatively close to Dem turnout? What do we take away from that?
Well, to the listener, I guess I would first, say stick to your initial instinct, which is don't read into November based on these turnout numbers. But with that in mind, I think, the totals make sense to me. Democrats in Nevada prefer mail voting more than Republicans do. So it makes sense, I think, just, looking at the voting methods that more Democrats would turn out in an election. There are more registered Democrats in Nevada, so it makes sense that they have a higher turnout as well. And I think, kind of with everything that we're talking about, the split contest here, it makes sense that some of the confusion, the dueling elections would kind of reduce and limit turnout on the Republican side, whereas on the Democratic side, it was as simple as, you're a Democratic voter, you're getting a mail ballot. Let's pump up the support for Joe Biden and, show support for the person who's going to be the nominee. I think it was a little bit of a simpler calculus on that side for Democratic Party just to say, this is kind of the plan. This is what we want our base to do to show support for the president. Whereas, things were just so messy on the Republican side, I think it turned a lot of people off from, participating in the process in any way. And, just on the whole, I think as we've been talking about, these are lower turnout affairs generally. Looking at past caucuses, primaries, even in other states, this is a single race election, basically. So there's less for people to really engage with on the ballot. And so there's a lot of reasons, I think, why turnout is lower in these elections and why it's harder to base any type of conclusions off of those turnout numbers.
This is why I call you the wizard, Sean. Okay, moving on to the next question. Quote, I understand the GOP didn't want to go with the state-run primary, but is there a reason the Republicans went with their own caucus instead of just a different primary? Tabitha, you were, well, I remember this last year because I was trying to help out. We were trying to cover the Republican state meeting last year when they decided to go for a caucus. So I guess just to start, what is it about the caucus in particular that Republicans decided they want to go with it? What was their explanation?
So when I talked with Michael McDonald about this, and they didn't let, I'm going to add a caveat here. They did not let press at the actual where they made the decision. They didn't let us in the room. They called press afterward to inform us of what the vote had been. Michael McDonald said that he felt that this was a better way for candidates to engage directly with voters, that it would create a more transparent process, and that they would be able to implement things like voter ID requirements that they felt were important as part of voting, right? So I think that was the reasoning that the GOP gave. And I do want to note, I know that we've drummed this in before, but it's really important that this state-run primary was already set to happen because of a 2021 law that went into effect, right? And so it was not that we've heard a bunch of rumors and conspiracy theories. I just want to clarify that the state-run primary was set to happen, and then the Republican Party here decided to have a caucus to determine the delegates.
Yeah, the sort of like talking point of like, oh, the Dems would say Trump forgot to file for the primary, as if one could do such a thing. So here's a question, Eric, that you might be able to answer, or we'll see. Because, quote, did you guys see or hear from any Ryan Binkley supporters? He was the other guy on the Republican ballot who not named Donald Trump. He had less than 1% of the vote, I think, all counted. Finishing that question, would love to hear if they wanted to speak given the overwhelming Trump support. So, Eric, did you find a Ryan Binkley supporter in the wild?
I regret to inform you, Jacob, I did not find a Ryan Binkley supporter in the wild. I know you are our de facto Ryan Binkley advocate and
Advocate,
reporter.
no, just that's my
Reporter.
beat. It's my beat.
I mean, I was looking at the latest data from Clark County, and there were according to the New York Times, there was 196 votes for Ryan Binkley compared to nearly 30,000 for Donald Trump. So they would have been hard to find, and they certainly were hard to find. A lot of people I saw were in Trump memorabilia, so yeah, I unfortunately came up empty.
Yeah, we know the needle is in the haystack somewhere, but finding it is the hard part. I guess just to check, Tabitha, did you find any Ryan Binkley supporters?
So at the caucus site that I was at, there were actually 10 votes for Ryan Binkley. However, I did not find anybody who would willingly talk to me about that candidate. I did have somebody, though, make a joke about who is Binky, which I thought was kind of wild. And that was not the only one that I heard that night. And actually, the no votes, or people that had made a mistake on their ballot or listed a candidate that wasn't Donald Trump or Ryan Binkley, they actually beat out the Binkley voters. So
This is reminiscent of Marianne Williamson losing to none of these candidates in the Democratic primary this year, perhaps. All right, so let's kick it back to you, John. Here's another listener question. Quote, there's been a lot of talk about them rigging the caucus for Trump, them being Republicans, this year. But in 2020, they just canceled the caucus entirely to give the delegates to Trump. Was that more typical because he was the incumbent at that point? I guess the question being here, why not just cancel the caucus if they want Trump to win?
Well, it was because he was an incumbent in 2020, but the motivation was similar, Jacob, in the sense that they didn't want him to be embarrassed at all. They just wanted to say Trump won. Trump is our God. We are not going to brook any dissent. This year, I think they anticipated maybe that there would be some candidates still left in the race by the time Nevada came around, especially Ron DeSantis, who, was run one of the worst campaigns in history. But I don't think anyone anticipated that. He had $200 million in a super PAC, which is why it's not coincidental that one of the rules they put in, and you guys know the language better than I do, essentially that a super PAC couldn't try to influence voters for the caucus, and that was directly to try to hurt DeSantis. So, if you're going to rig something, at least don't be so clumsy about it, so we can see it so clearly. And they made candidates pay $55,000 and agree not to be on the primary ballot. So the motivation was the same. The methods were a little different because they did this so long ago. I think they anticipated that especially DeSantis would still be in the race. And so I think that's why that happened. If I can just real quickly, Jacob, share a great historical note. You guys weren't around for this, but in 2015, the Republican National Committee wanted to switch Nevada to a primary. But Harry Reid and others at that time still wanted a caucus. Michael McDonald was seen by a lot of people in the legislature. He was up there as a double agent, that he was trying to kill the move to a primary. And the RNC was furious. And right before the vote, I got an email from someone at the RNC, someone high up in the RNC, showing me that they had forced McDonald to tweet I support the primary because it's greater turnout or whatever it said. So there have always been these machinations around this, but you can't stop Michael McDonald from doing what Michael McDonald wants to do.
Absolutely incredible historical tidbit. And I guess it's reminiscent too of because when Nevada finally switched to the primary in 21, the Republicans were hopping mad because it was all part of moving Nevada and South Carolina up the calendar, Iowa and New Hampshire down. As good as that worked this year, we saw. Another question just came in. Quote, I know many Republicans who voted in both the primary and the caucus. So this one for you, Sean, how can you add the two turnouts together? I guess just to explain, because this I think goes back to the previous question we got. Can you really add the turnouts together? No, right? Because there's nothing stopping someone from voting in both contests. So we expect a lot of crossover from one to the other.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure there certainly was a lot of crossover just because, these are contests where a lot of highly engaged partisans are participating in them. So a lot of folks who are, engaged enough to participate in a primary are also going to be engaged enough to participate in the caucus. I think that's, part of the reason none of these candidates beat Nikki Haley is because there were so many, Trump supporters who probably caucused for Trump that when they voted in the primary, they voted for none of these candidates to kind of drown out any sort of potential Haley win. Unfortunately, I don't have the data to figure out who those crossover voters are. I guess we'll see what kind of data I could acquire from the Nevada Republican Party, but certainly we could figure out who everyone is that voted in the primary. I mean, every county maintains a vote cast record, basically, where you can get a data of all the registered voters who participated. And if we had any kind of similar data from the Republican Party, we could do a comparison and kind of figure out how many of them are crossover voters, but not sure how likely that is at this point.
Sean,
Yeah.
maybe we could maybe the Indy could pony up $55,000 and we could get the data. What do you think?
Well, and I think the
Perhaps.
other point too is like this is anecdotal, of course, but John, you were at the Gwynn Center event last night, and I think you tweeted out that you'd spoken with Assemblywoman Jill Dickman, she's a Republican Assemblywoman up in Northern Nevada. She had voted in the primary, but then she showed up to caucus and then said that she left because there were really long lines. And we saw throughout the caucus process that there were extraordinarily long lines. So even when we're talking about these crossover voters, you have to know that there might have been a higher turnout of the primary because people didn't want to wait in line to either submit their ballot and then leave or participate in the discussions that typically happen at a caucus.
Yeah, to some degree, how soon we forget how disastrous every caucus is every cycle. I was here for the Indy for the 2020 Democratic caucus, and for those who don't remember, they were trying out this new ranked choice deal. That was what a treat that was to try and figure out in real time. Everybody was figuring that out in real time. Okay, well, we're still getting. Okay, here we go. Tabitha, here's a question for you specifically. What was with the sea turtles and orca at Spanish Springs? Where is the story? Question mark, exclamation point.
So I actually going to email the school about this. It's on my to-do list today because I was at the Spanish Springs Elementary School in Washoe County. It's one of the larger caucus sites. I think there were 25 precincts represented. And what happened is people were funneled through into this multi-purpose room that was kind of like a lunchroom, but also had a stage for an auditorium. And the theme of this was sea. So there were like fish around and a giant orca was hanging from the ceiling along with a giant sea turtle. So if you followed me on Instagram, you saw this video. You also saw me talking about kind of how they were counting votes because we did get to watch that process. I believe they are made out of styrofoam. We are still waiting to hear back from the school on that.
We need confirmation. All right, John, I know you have to leave in a few minutes. We will still keep recording. So if you're in the live stream, you can keep watching, keep asking questions. But John, before you go, I want to ask a couple sort of, what happens next questions, because for the Republicans, I think a lot of attention was paid on Tuesday, certainly for Nikki Haley and sort of her strategy of not even just not investing in Nevada, but sort of aggressively ignoring Nevada, being mean about ignoring Nevada. So how much of an error was it really? And I guess, are we going to know before South Carolina how much of an error it was? But like, for her to not try and win Nevada's primary, even if it was going to get her delegates, she didn't do anything. So do we have a sense of like what those consequences might actually be?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of difficult to answer the hypothetical. My argument was that, we're a cheap date for a minimal investment. She could have come here, done a rally or two, and said, this is where there's going to be big turnout. All the Republicans are going to come out. Donald Trump is chicken to face me among the entire Republican electorate. So he has had this caucus created and fixed so he can declare victory. Why is he afraid of me? I hope my supporters will come out and show some strength. Do I think that means that she would have won the primary as opposed to losing to none of the above? Maybe. But I think she certainly would have cut into the margin, and she might have won, depending on what happened. But now, what was the point of her, as you put it, being mean to Nevada and saying that kind of stuff? What does she have to lose? Total long shot. It looks like Trump is going to crush her in South Carolina, but those polls can change, by the way. It's happened in Nevada. It looked like Hillary was going to crush Bernie Sanders, and then he came back after what happened in New Hampshire. These kinds of things do change, and the narrative momentum is much more important to her at this point than amassing our 26 delegates. So I just think for a minimal investment of her time, she could have at least tried, and it might have helped her going into South Carolina. Instead, every national headline is none of the above beats Nikki Haley. Terrible for her.
Oh yeah,
And
just getting memed left and right. You were saying, Sean?
And Jacob, yeah, if I can add to that, it's puzzling to me because Nevada is a critical battleground state in the general election. I mean, if she had any hopes of actually winning the nomination and competing in the general election, Nevada is a state that she would probably need to win in order to win a general election for president and win the Electoral College. So it makes no sense why she would go, really to great lengths to continue to piss off Nevada voters.
Yeah, Nevada Republicans who would be sort of critical to getting her over the hump here. Okay, real quick, John, I wanted to ask you about the Democrats, and I wanted to ask you about Joe Biden. 90% is not quite 96%, which is what he got in South Carolina, is not quite 99%. It's what Trump got in the caucus. Still, 90%, I mean, voters in the Democratic primary could still choose none of these candidates, and only about 5.5, 6% chose none of these candidates. So what do we make of Biden's strength among Democrats who ended up voting here compared with all of these polls? So many polls in battleground states nationwide that show Biden either weak in head-to-head matchups with Trump or losing in Nevada specifically, or just terrible approval ratings. I think he's the lowest approval rating of any president heading into a re-election. Maybe not ever, but it's quite low. So, I mean, how do we square these two numbers?
So I think Sean alluded to this, and I think it's very, very, it's just a fatal mistake that a lot of analysts make trying to compare the two universes that vote in a very low turnout primary. It was going to be a very high turnout general election. I think what this shows, and Biden coming here for a couple of days showed this too, is they wanted to make him look as good as they possibly could and get a good turnout. Now, good turnout is like, a fifth of the voters, and they got them out. And the Democrats are bragging, they put out a memo. We got our core groups out and all of that stuff, and they're really hyping that. But it does show that they can turn their voters out, a limited number of their voters, in a contest where it's not really a contest. But I don't think it tells us anything about the general election. I can tell you for sure, Jacob, that smart Democrats here are really, really worried about the general election here, not because they think Trump is winning by 8 or 10 points as some of these polls show, but he only lost by 2.5 points the last two times he ran here. So they're worried about it being close. They're worried about what's going to happen with Biden, that his numbers are so bad as well, and that he's hemorrhaging the base. And so you didn't see that here, but it's a completely different universe. I do have to run, but I just want to tell everybody, Jacob, if you don't mind, that this is and I know I sound like the proud father here. This is the best team that has ever covered politics and campaigns and government in this state. I hope people listening and watching will follow all of you. We are gonna be all over this election from a data viewpoint, from dynamics of the election. So this is the best team. So follow them.
Oh, I appreciate that, John. And I know you have to run, but we will be sticking around for about the next 15 minutes or so. So keep those questions coming. And if you want to see more of John, head to Craft Beer and Wine at 5:30 tonight in Reno. He'll be there. You can pepper him with even more questions. Sorry, Southern Nevada listeners. I'm in Southern Nevada. I don't get to pepper him with questions. I don't know what to do about that. So I guess Eric, I want to ask you, because you've been talking to a bunch of voters, and it does feel like some version of every story we've written in the last 2 weeks is we're looking towards the general. The candidates are looking towards the general. The campaigns are looking towards the general. Nevada's looking towards the general, because in the general will matter. 6 electoral votes could be the difference, right? If only 7 states are really battleground states. So Eric, when you've been talking to voters or when you've been going to rallies, what is the sense that you get that people are looking forward to that general election matchup?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone is, like you mentioned, everyone is paying attention to November, even the candidates themselves. I mean, Kamala Harris was here a couple of weekends ago, and I don't even know if she even mentioned the primary once in her race. Everyone has set their sights on November. And the conversations that I have with voters are very much centered around Biden versus Trump. People have almost universally, I mean, the Trump supporters I've spoken with have pretty universally panned almost everything there is to say about the Biden administration. Same goes for Democrat voters and what another Trump administration could look like. So I think it's very much what we're seeing across the country, in that it's pretty clear, barring really something unforeseen, that this will be the general election again. And I think the comments from the candidates and the actions from the parties reflect that.
Yeah, I mean, just speaking, because I was at one of the most interesting conversations I had with a voter was actually at a Marianne Williamson event, believe it or not. And there was a guy there, and he is a Democrat, but he's like hyper frustrated with the party. He hates this sort of two-party system. He's a big backer of the Forward Party, right? Andrew Yang's sort of not left, right, forward thing. And but he's still voting for Biden. He wants Biden to win. He hates the idea of another Trump presidency. And he was like, I asked him, like, well, like, do you think Biden's doing a good job? And he said to me, oh, Biden doesn't get enough credit. Like, no one ever gives him credit when he does things. So I think that there's lots of voters sort of in this middle ground who, like, theoretically like the Biden presidency, feel like it's done a lot of things, but maybe they can't name him, or they get like frustrated that people can't name them. But they're these sort of soft Biden voters, we'll call them, who are like they're not showing up to Biden rallies. These are not the people who are going to every Kamala Harris event in Las Vegas. And I think that those are the people that might, if Biden is going to win Nevada again by, whatever, what was it? Yeah, 2.5 points he won in 2020. It's those sort of like on the margins, folks who only show up in presidential elections that they'll need, and that I'm not sure that they have right now.
I think just to add on, like, there is all but likely that Trump and Biden will be the main candidates, but I was at a Robert F. Kennedy event a week ago, and his supporters, while he hasn't qualified for Nevada's ballot yet, his supporters are very much behind him, and it stems from the distaste that they have for Trump and Biden. And the New York Times poll that I think John alluded to earlier, it found in October that 23% of Nevadans would support Kennedy. Of course, that's still a ways out, and he still has to qualify for the ballot. But there's a chance that it's not just two main candidates being on the ballot this year, as he could pose he could be a formidable spoiler to either candidate.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, serious discussion out of the way. We have been getting some real incredible questions from the chat. So we are going to start getting into those. And so now is as good a time as any to transition to the lightning round. If you are a regular listener of our On the Trail podcast, which, by the way, this is being converted into an On the Trail episode, so you can catch it in your feed if you're not able to stay through the whole thing. The lightning round is where we stick all of the stories that we were thinking about that week that we just want to talk about. We just want to talk about that story that week. And so right now, you people have really sent us some real questions that we are going to just run through here as the live lightning round. And to start, this one might need some context. The Knuckles the Echidna show that is on Paramount Plus. If anyone's seen the trailer, it is very obviously set in Reno, which incredible stuff. So I guess just to start, what does everyone think of it being set in Reno? Tabitha, the resident Renoite, we'll start with you.
I mean, more movies should be set in Reno. Let's be honest. Let's give some love to the northern part of the state. Like, no shade to Southern Nevada, but Northern Nevada also has some phenomenal landscapes, wonderful things to do. There's nice weather here in both the summer and the winter. So I just want to say that this to me is like, let's start breaking into Northern Nevada. And Las Vegas is not Nevada. Nevada is not Las Vegas, right?
Sure. I guess you could make that argument. I'll say this. The most prominent part of that trailer is them blowing up the National Bowling Stadium, which if you're going to highlight Reno, I think just what an incredible vibe.
I have nothing to add to that. I'm not going to comment.
Okay. Next question. Which Nevada political figure, past or present, would you choose as the main character in an Oscar-worthy biopic, and who would play them? And we are allowed to choose ourselves. Sean, you get to start on this one.
That's a really tough question. I mean, I feel like Harry Reid is the easy pick for a focus of the biopic, but I'm sure if you really went deep into Nevada history, there's a lot of like old Western figures you could pick out that would be, you know, a great focus. Like, give me J.G. Scrugum. Go look him up. One of the first.
Yeah.
He's quite a weird character.
Absolutely.
One of the first Nevada governors. I don't know.
All right, Tabitha, quick.
I am
biopic.
going to say Barbara Bennett. She was actually Reno's first female mayor. She got involved in local politics as part of this Northern Nevada Mobile Homeowners Association. This is at a time where like we're seeing a lot of problems with rent, and she was part of the rent control discussion, and she was not a candidate that anybody wanted her to win. And I just think she'd be a fascinating person to get a biopic of. And yes, Harry Reid is a good choice, but come on, Barbara Bennett.
It's the easy choice. All right, Eric, you have recently moved to Nevada. You haven't been here too long, so we're going to spring this on you. Who do you want a biopic about?
Yeah, my Nevada political historical knowledge is admittedly not as good as the others on this call. So I will go for the de facto Harry Reid answer, but I will add that a good biopic has to have a good source material. So, and I heard that there may be a biography of Harry Reid being released at some point by someone who may or may not be affiliated with the Nevada Independent. Yeah, I mean, it's all about the script.
Yeah, John's waiting on those movie options. Okay. I guess for me, I want the biopic to be about the dude who was in charge of telegraphing the Nevada Constitution during the Civil War to Washington, D.C. For the longest time, I believe the most expensive telegraph ever sent in the world, because it was so long. It was so long, guys. Anyways, I want to know what that guy was up to. Moving on. Absolutely incredible stuff in the chat, guys. If a vampire cop came to your door with a warrant, could they come in? Sean.
No. I saw this one go in the chat, and I'm adamant about this one. I mean, this is like an intrinsic trait to vampires that they need permission to enter. So I don't think the kind of current constructs of our legal system today supersede that innate quality in vampires.
Okay, Tabitha, do you agree?
I agree with Sean. No way. Yeah, no, that vampire would need to have some sort of permission to get in, and not
the
happening.
warrant doesn't count. Wow. All right, Eric, are you gonna no?
Yeah, I will not go contrarian here. I'll agree with Sean and Tabitha. I didn't even know the trait about vampires about permission to enter, but that is just even more reason.
Absolutely.
I will add though, Jacob, if this were true, it could make for a great movie about a vampire who is a judge. And so they issue warrants to get entry into their victims' homes.
Wow, someone make that screenplay. All right, we're just going to keep rolling here. Can you comment on the evolution of John's facial hair from mustache to goatee to full beard? When will he go full Santa? Sean.
I mean, I think it's a good evolution. I think John is rocking the beard, so good for him. And you know what, if he goes full Santa, like I'm all for it. I think just have fun with your facial hair. Do whatever you want with it,
All right, Tabitha, you're the arbiter of facial hair. What's your take?
I do not think I can comment on this at all, but I will just say that it's John's, face. He could do what he wants with it.
A wise choice, Tabitha. Eric?
Yeah, I mean, as someone who cannot grow out a beard, I applaud anyone who uses their facial hair to the maximum potential. So I'm all for it.
I'm in the same boat. So you and me. All right. Someone in the chat said Jacob is Liberace on the biopic thing. So I'm not going to respond to that. Lightning question, and we'll end here. We have to stop. Oh, wait, no, it wasn't someone. It was our producer, Joey. He's making fun of me. Anyways, final question of the day. What does bubblegum ice cream even taste like? Let the children enjoy bubblegum ice cream. Sean, this is clearly directed at you. Please respond.
Yeah. I mean, I know it squeaked through in that Henderson kids vote. I've had some information that I've kept under wraps that I feel like I can disclose here now,
There's a
which
scoop?
is that
We're getting a scoop?
as a child, I used to really enjoy the bubblegum ice cream at Cold Stone, which is like almost neon blue color. Like it's kind of heinous. And I haven't had it probably in more than a decade, but I do remember really enjoying it. So I honestly cannot fault children too much for sending that one through to the next round of the election.
Tabitha, Eric, any ice cream takes?
I have never eaten bubblegum ice cream. It's always the most it's the worst color. It looks fake. I can't do it. Even as a kid, I couldn't do it. So I just think they should have knocked it out because it looks like somebody dumped hazardous, like toxic waste into ice cream and like that green goo that you see in the, Scooby-Doo comic movies or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of class bubblegum in like the group of like birthday cake ice cream and cotton candy ice cream, which I think has no place being in ice cream.
Unserious ice creams. I'll just say I agree. That's my host privilege. All right, real last question. We will end it here after this. Everyone, who is winning the Super Bowl this Sunday in Las Vegas, Nevada? Sean. You are muted. You've
Messed
committed
up
the
there.
cardinal Zoom sin.
I have indeed. I'm going to go Niners 38-35 over the Chiefs.
Bold. The Brock Purdy Sons. Tabitha, where are you?
I'm going to go with Taylor Swift's boyfriend's team, right? Taylor Swift won the Grammy. Taylor Swift's boyfriend is going to win the Super Bowl. He'll make it into the NFL Hall of Fame. I don't even know what typical scores in an NFL game are, so I'm not even going to guess the score. But maybe we'll have a 5-point difference and it's going to be a tight game. I will say I was really, really hoping that the Lions would make it. And when I found that out, I was like, well, I guess I'll root for Taylor Swift. When they found out that they didn't make it, I'll root for Taylor Swift's team.
I was also rooting for the Lions to make it, so now I'm just sort of adrift. Eric, who is winning the Super Bowl?
I will go Chiefs 24-20. Sean, you're really underestimating these teams' defenses. So I'm going more low scoring.
It's in Vegas. It's going to be a show, Eric. This is going to be electric football on Sunday night.
No, I'm with Eric on this one. I predict some absolutely disgusting Rams Patriots type Super Bowl. It's going to be 15-12. It's just a score that never happens. Just everyone will be sent to the Shadow Realm for some reason. Look, this will be nuts. Or it'll be, you're right, Sean, maybe it'll be 38-35 and we'll all go home happy. But Joey is in the chat yelling at us. He says 49ers score 49 points and win. He is obviously wrong, but that is where we will leave it for this episode of On the Trail. This was a stealth episode of On the Trail because it was a live stream. But if you want to listen to it, you can catch it on our podcast feed. You can listen to it wherever you get podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, on YouTube, no less. We will see you next week.